Hi everyone, this is Erik Gomez with Uber, and I just wanted to go over a brief overview of how we manage a highly dynamic fleet. So how do we look at our team? We think of our team as a team that enables platform diversity by building and scaling software management through robust automation. And we'll get into that in a second, but just a little bit more about our team. So the way we look at ourselves is we're basically three principled types of engineers. One is the endpoint side, which is Mac OS, Linux, and Windows. Other side is our mobile clients, so iOS, Android, and Chrome OS. And then kind of more of our production side, so our Uber Eats platform. And so if you see, we have 600 properties, tens of thousands of endpoints, tens of thousands of mobile clients, and then hundreds of thousands of our restaurant partners. But we're going to be focusing today on the endpoint side. So we use a lot of various softwares, whether they're open source or closed source products, but we'll go through them kind of one by one. I know this is a lot to digest, but I'll try to take it through you. So our first pillar is mobile device management. We had chosen Workspace ONE a few years ago. We had looked at other products like Micro MDM or Simple MDM, but we ultimately chose Workspace ONE. It was multi-platform, and it allowed us to do custom MDM, which is what we're really looking for on the macOS side. Having said that, though, we've been reevaluating the Windows side, and we're starting to think that maybe Intune might be a better solution. Workspace ONE is great, but Intune just seems to be a little faster on the MDM side. Now, we kind of think of the next part of our management ecosystem is provisioning. And so, how do we get all these other tools on? Well, for macOS, we use Install Applications. That's a tool that I open sourced a few years ago when I was at Pinterest. And for our Windows side, we're actually using PPKG process with a PowerShell provisioner. We may open source this at some point, but we're still trying to flesh this out. And as I spoke a second ago about Intune, we may be using more of an autopilot method, and so the PPKG process may no longer be needed. For the Linux side, we're still fleshing this out as well, but right now it's like a pre-seed idea. Think of this as like a monolithic image to some degree, and then a Python provisioner tool. So Nate Walk, he wrote the Python provisioner tool. It's pretty sweet, and it's tailored to the Linux ecosystem because there's certain things that we don't have access to or we do in some other platforms. Then, of course, one of our main pillars of endpoint management is Chef, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But it is our bread and butter. Facebook kind of pioneered this idea of using Chef for endpoint management. I used this model at Pinterest. I knew that Gusto and a few other companies also use Chef. I think Slack is another one. But yeah, it's multi-platform, and it allows us to have desired state management. So, you think about endpoints, they're going to constantly drift. The users are going to change their machines, and Chef brings them back into alignment. And you don't necessarily have to write scripts, you're writing state. For our encryption mechanisms, we use Graham Gilbert's Crypt Encrypt server. For Windows, we use BitLocker and Microsoft's built-in methodologies for that. And then for Linux, we use a tool called FDECTL. This is another tool that Nate wrote. It's written in Go, and what it allows you to do is ship keys to your crypt server. Think of it as kind of like the crypt agent, but for Linux. We're trying really hard to open source this, and hopefully we can have more information about that soon. For packaging, we kind of used some traditional ones that you've heard about. So we use Monkey and Auto Package for the Mac side. We use Gorilla. This is a tool written by Dustin Davis at Pinterest, and it's kind of like a Monkey tool for Windows. And then for Linux, we just use apt. There's nothing too special about this. With Ubuntu 20.04, they're kind of making some new software layers for this. Maybe apt is something that we will no longer use or will use in lieu of some of these other tools. But for now, it's apt. And then for updates, I wrote a tool called Nudge, and we'll also talk about that in a second. But that is a tool that allows people to upgrade their machines, whether they're running minor upgrades or major upgrades on Mac OS. And then it allows us to pretty quickly get people into alignment with what minimum operating system we want. On the Windows side, Microsoft actually has some really robust tools here. So we use the Microsoft MDM CSP, and that has worked pretty phenomenally for us. It allows us to be beyond corp and have different update mechanisms and update timings. And then, of course, for Linux, it's still apt. Now, how do we get this information? Right? We have all of these tools, but how do we visualize and understand the health of our fleet? We use an ELK-SCAC and FileBeat. And so we look at what our agents are using process-wise. We look at the health of a machine. Has Chef ran successfully? How has Chef ran? And then we also have some Slack webhooks that go into the FileBeat. So for instance, if our Chef runs, let's say we land something and 10% of the fleet starts failing, we'll get a notification to that quickly. We can then look at the ELK-SCAC and try to understand what went wrong in our deployments, and then kind of go from there. Maybe we have to have an emergency diff. It's rare. We try to test very heavily, but it can still happen. And then kind of to go along the lines of this, while we do have ELK and FileBeat, we also have SAL and GoSal. It's just another mechanism of having reporting. SAL gives us a great GUI for our service desk and for some of our other partners to understand fleet health at a quicker, digestible method. I know there's GoSal that someone's working on to have Linux, but we haven't actually tested that, so it's on our to-do. But one other thing is, how do we maintain what we write is actually what is deployed to the machines? Well, a lot of our tools are in a Git repository. Actually, all of them are, but there's various types of Git repositories. But our install applications, our PPKG, PowerShell provisioner, the pre-seed and Python provisioner, Monkey, AutoPackage, Gorilla, and Chef, they're all in Git repositories. And when someone lands something into the master branch, our CI/CD pipeline kicks off. It uploads that data to Amazon's S3, which updates it to CloudFront, and then devices within about 120 seconds can see that update. So it's pretty powerful, and it ensures that what we've written is what actually gets deployed, which is paramount when you're talking our scale. But again, how do we manage all of these different tools? We have 20 or 30 of them. Well, the answer ultimately is Chef. This is how Chef kind of describes themselves. They are a powerful automation platform that transforms complex configurations into code, bringing your client machines to life. And that's a really accurate statement. I mean, you can think about what you do with Chef. It can actually simplify some of your configurations. So we use Facebook's API model. And what that essentially means is that there's a set of key value pairs that you configure, and then the machine will take action on those values. But what that allows you to do is have configurable things. So let's say for the CP team, I wanted to have, in this example, 60-second timeout. I could just say, if CP team, make no default CP example timeout 60, else 30. There's other tools that obviously run, but it allows you to just focus on quick variables and being able to manipulate those variables. So this is a very, very simple example, but let me take you through a real world example. So we've open sourced a tool called CP Nudge. This is how we manage Nudge in our fleet, and it allows us to do pretty complex things, but I'm going to keep it simple and we'll just focus on what we do. So if we need to install Nudge, we just say node default CP Nudge install equals true. It's by default false, so it won't do anything if you were to add CP Nudge to your Chef cookbooks. This is how you tell it to do the first thing. But also, how Nudge works is there's a JSON file, and that JSON file tells it, hey, this is the minimum operating system that you want to run. So we want to manage that JSON. So you do node default CP Nudge manage JSON equals true. And in the JSON, there's specific preferences. So in this case, we're giving a cutoff date of June 4th, 2020, we're saying that the minimum operating system version we want is 10.15.5. And the minimum operating system sub-build version is 19F101. So as you probably are well aware, Apple released 10.15.5, and then a few days later, they released 10.15.5 supplemental update. Supplemental update is 19F101, whereas 10.15.5 is 19F96. So we want to ensure that everyone is running the supplemental update to get all of the latest security patches. So how does this end up working for the end user? Well, they get this pop-up, and this pop-up runs every 30 minutes on their machines, and it shows their username, it shows their serial number, if they're fully updated, how many days are left on their requirement to have this installed. Now, this is a screenshot of 19F96. We had to update this. I didn't have time to update the icon here, but it gives you an idea of what it looks like. We just give a very small amount of information. We encourage them to update, and then we also kind of warn them that, hey, if you don't update, you may lose some functionality. But ultimately, all they have to do is click on the update button. So if they were on 10.15.4, they click the update button, it opens up the software update GUI. And if they're on 10.14 or 10.13 and they click the update button, it'll open up the Catalina app update. So that way, all they have to know is you click the update button and then you follow Apple's UI. The reason why we did this is if you're a Monkey user, you might have encountered updates throughout the past few years where Apple is not testing the software update CLI tool, which is what Monkey uses. And unfortunately, if we even had 1% of our machines die through this method, we could have 200 or up to even 500 users impacted by this. So we cannot risk using a platform that Apple is no longer investing or testing in. So we have to use the native UI, and that's essentially why we wrote Nudge. But let's look at our 10.15.5 Nudge event. So on May 25th, we had only nudged 10.15.3. So you can see that we had a very small amount of 10.14.6 machines. We had about 33% 10.15.3 and about 66% 10.15.4. No 10.15.5 because obviously it hadn't come out yet. Now, the day it came out, we had not nudged, and there was, at the end of the day, there was about less than 0.5%. But on the 27th is the first day that we nudged. And we can instantly see that by the end of the day, we had 14.2% of users on 10.15.5. And then by June 4th, we had 87.5% of the company. So that's a pretty amazing thing. Now, we did have some scragglers. There's like almost let's say actually almost 15% of people that had not managed the deadline. But Nudge gets very, very aggressive, and it really encourages them. So if we look at of today, we have almost 98% of our fleet on 10.15.5. So if you haven't checked out Nudge, I highly encourage you to do that. You'll find that there's a great amount of people that are using it. Again, if you want to enforce it with Chef, you'll have some really cool flexible options that you can do, or you can just use Nudge by itself. It's not requirements to have Chef. It doesn't require to have AirWatch. You can use it with Jamf or any other platform. So if you'd like to see our Uber open source cookbooks, you can go to github.com/Uber/CPE-chef-cookbooks. We have a short link here for the open source projects that we've mentioned, and we will be in Q&A, Nate and I, in a few minutes. But for now, I'm going to pass it to Matt and have him finish the conference.